And I'll just warn you ahead of time that I put an immense amount of work into the one slide that I made for today, with the idea that I would have time to add additional slides, except that then the power went out for the entire town. And I was prepared to take this little thingy here and go sit in the full day sun on the side of the road where I have better phone signal and talk to you all and not use my computer until the power came back on 5 minutes ago. And so what I might do is actually go into OneDrive where I have all of my cloud storage of photos to just show you some photos of all the crazy stuff that's happened in the last 2 weeks, since I didn't put them into a slideshow. But we'll see if we want to do that or not. Ah, sí, tierra querida, es la verdad, Paula, es la verdad. For those you don't know, Paula also lives in Colombia, so she knows how it goes. About twice a year in Barichara, we lose power for just random reasons. So it's not all the time. But we actually have a lot of ground to cover today because we haven't had an update in 2 weeks. And a lot of stuff has happened, some of it enacted by others of you who are not here in Barichara, because so much is happening in the blended space of Earth Regenerators and Barichara and the rest of the world. And so what I'm going to do right now is show you my one slide where you can imagine what we would have talked about had I put together slides. So let me just do that really quickly now. And so this is the slide that I prepared. I mean, I actually had another slide. I'll show you the first slide too. I had a picture slide of Akasha, which is the permaculture farm we went to about a week ago. What was it, 2 weekends ago? It was a week ago. I'm actually going to go to this. So this is the one slide I'd put together that each of these bubbles would have been several slides for me to go into some depth and talk about each of the things. And I just wanted you to see this because I'm so proud of my one slide. To basically say, we can talk around these topics, but they won't be quite as structured as I normally make them. But I just want to name them so you can get a sense of what's been happening in the last 2 weeks. And one thing is that we had our second Centropic Agroforestry workshop, which was phenomenal because this one focused on continual food production with campesino farmers and a community orchard or a community garden. So it's a place where 16 families are already practicing subsistence food growing, something that started during the time of the pandemic. And we had a workshop that involved strategically recruiting young leaders from the countryside, from different rural areas to engage their interest in possibly becoming trained further and eventually having some of them become instructors of Centropic Agroforestry. And so the Centropic Agroforestry workshop that happened a week ago, it was Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of last week, was a really big deal. And that's in addition to all of the field site visits that happen every maybe like 5 times a week, so almost every day. There's a different farm or finca or nature reserve that is visited by the participants of the first and second workshops. So there's just a lot of activity happening there. Then also, we made a visit. One of our field visits was to Akasha, which is a permaculture farm and learning center that is on the other side of San Hill from here. So it's a little over an hour drive away from Barichara, in a place where they get a lot more water, a lot more rain, huge cascading waterfalls coming down off the cliffs. And that's where all the adventure sports people go to do whitewater rafting and bouldering and those sorts of things from San Hill. So even though it's only about like 40 kilometers away or like 30 miles away, it's a significantly different landscape and ecosystem. But it's part of our 500,000 hectare bioregion. And the people who run the Akasha Permaculture Center were participants in our first Centropic Agroforestry workshop. So there's just a lot of weaving that's happening there. Then also we've made a lot of progress with the Territorial Foundation, starting the process of setting up its legal, the legal container for us to legally constitute it, and establishing fiscal sponsorship with Territorial, which is the national foundation that's helping us. So there's a lot of things happening on that front. A lot of progress and clarity moving forward with Refi Barichara, the regenerative finance event for the first week of October. So about a month and a half away now. Also, the Barichara Pledge community is starting to grow in its activity, in its size, and in its modularity, because we're starting to create different focused groups within it, and it's getting quite interesting, including that we're creating a Barichara Landscape Fund. So we have a fundraising group that is taking the common land model that Benji so beautifully presented yesterday to bioregional weavers, and preparing ourselves to try and raise $500,000 for the Barichara project. And so we have a group that's working on that. We've put together some materials, published some of it on the Earth Regenerators website, starting to engage interest using social media. So lots of things happening there. And we're creating a community fund for children and families around all of the regenerative education work with kids that's happening here. And so these are all things that are happening in the last 2 weeks that I would show you photos of, and I might, and that I was going to put into the presentation, but didn't. And then down in the corner, you can see the first great transition of Earth Regenerators, which is, oh, there's someone who is making noise. I'm not sure who that is, but I'll just mute everyone. There we go. And the thing with the great transition of Earth Regenerators is that lots of things are happening right now, including that several of you and others that you're collaborating with are currently designing the next community-led learning journey, since I'll not be leading the next learning journey. That bioregional catalysts, led beautifully by Benji, but with lots of collaboration and collusion, really playing with the idea of what it means to go big to the landscape scale. Lots of interesting things happening in the relationship with Regen Foundation and possible funding models connected to the Refi Barichara event, and connected to what the ER fund is starting to become. And so there's just like a bunch of stuff happening. And yes.
Yes, that's me.
Tyler arrived.
Yes, I arrived 2 days ago.
I was just waiting till I stopped. Got someone. My phone is ringing off the hook. Maybe it's the bank. They will bother me later. And while all of this is happening, the thing I took 0 photographs of is the full-time job I have right now, dealing with administrative absurdity in Colombia. I think I've spent a total of between 40 and 50 hours in the last 2 weeks doing things related to my visa, and it's still not complete, as it keeps my bank accounts locked up, keeps me from being able to pay local people for work with money raised from donations, complicating issues for receiving money for Las Albercas, and all kinds of fun things. Thank you, Colombian bureaucracy. And so there's just a lot going on. And what I was intending to do, were I able to create a presentation? This is like the 6th time this person's calling me, so it must be actually important. They can just keep calling me for as long as they want. The main thing I wanted to do was show you what's happening here with pictures, which is why I was going to put a lot of photos from my cloud drive into a presentation until the power went out. So what I might do is just in a moment go through and show you some pictures from the cloud drive, so you can see some of what's been going on. But before doing that, I just wanted to say that that one slide I created, which would have structured the sections of a presentation, should just give you a sense that really there's a lot of forward motion on multiple fronts. And it's hard to say if it's accelerating because it's been really fast paced for a few months now, but it's definitely coalescing and integrating. And so I think the pace is about the same, but the capacity for integrating the pieces is deepening. And so, so that's like my version of what the presentation will look like without photos, which I'll show you in a moment. But I think before going and showing you a bunch of photos, I would love to just know if there are any questions people have about this general scope of what's happening that might shape how we tell stories with photos, since I'm not going to be using a structured presentation. So if anyone would like to raise your hand, if there's something you'd like to ask for direction of what we talk about today, or to shape the agenda of today's discussion, you could also put it into the chat if you like. Irvi, first with you, please.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I just wanted to share what I've been finding most helpful is when you've shared things kind of like the behind the scenes perspective, the less obvious perspective to what might see on the surface. And that happened in the biracial Weaver's call yesterday, where you shared a few things about, you know, the process behind, kind of like the difference between what you see in Common Land's website versus the thought process behind that, and how radically different it can be. So yeah, I just want to highlight that in these updates too. That's always where I find, you know, that's really good learning about how things actually happen that's not visible. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I will make note of that and hold the discussion with that sentiment in mind. Claire.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I guess in a way it's sort of a similar question, but just wanting, how do you make sense of what the land as a coherent whole, like as a bioregion? How do you make sense as the different groups, how you make decisions so that it fits the coherence of the whole? And just really speaking to that, because I guess there's a back part to that question, and that is observing people. When people talk about bioregionalism, where that may not be, you know, they're responding to pieces of the land, but it may not be as a whole system. And how that can confuse things, because anyway, I don't know if that's a clear question, but
I think so. Having listened into about half of the bioregional Weavers call yesterday, I think I have a sense of where you're coming from for that. I can elaborate clarity on what I think Claire is saying, or at least part of what she's saying, which is that oftentimes in the realm of bioregionalism, at least for humans, because bioregions for starfish and deer and bears and stuff are a little bit more straightforward. But with humans, the cultural element, how humans define the cultural element of a bioregion is less constrained than the direct ecological connection of other organisms. And so you end up with a lot of the bioregionalism discourse focuses on key contentions. Like, we disagree about this part of the definition of bioregionalism. And even though they agree on like 99.7% of everything, 80% of the conversation is about what they disagree about. And then when someone enters the bioregionalism discourse, they're all confused. And I have seen this in every political discourse in one way or another, and bioregionalism is just no exception to that. And so, so one of the ways that this comes up is, like, I'll use the example of the bioregion that I really became familiar with when I was studying bioregionalism, which is Cascadia, because I lived in Oregon and I lived in Washington. And so by living in Oregon and Washington, I got to know people who were really deep in the bioregionalism movement of what's called Cascadia, including the people that created the Cascadia Independence Project and some of that stuff. And what happens when you look at that story is there are two really powerful lenses that have stood up over decades. But if you enter the discourse, you don't see that long-standing clarity. One is that the coastal estuaries, together with the rivers, which is basically the bioregion of salmon, because salmon run up the rivers to spawn, more or less corresponds really well with the trade networks of the indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest of North America. And so it's not accidental that the people of that part of the planet organize so much of their culture and trade around where the salmon are. And so when you look at the Salish Sea and the coastal estuaries, but then you also get into, like, how does it get to Idaho? Why do they include that? Why does it go up near Whistler and British Columbia? Oh, because the salmon go there. And so it's actually fairly obvious if you squint your eyes and go, oh, where people could build a subsistence, they could live like hunter-gatherers but be sedentary because they had such abundance of fish. In addition to everything else, really explains a lot. And so that's one piece. And then the other piece, which is paralleled and they reinforce each other, is where's the water come from? And in that place, in that particular part of the world, there are very few aquifers. All the water that hits the Cascade Mountains runs off directly back into the ocean, which is why they had to build dams in the mountains to create reservoirs, because there's no groundwater supply. And that's because those are all volcanoes, and the basalt, the volcanic rock, isn't like sandstone that creates these pockets where aquifers can form. And so it just happens because of the hydrology of the region that people can't create agricultural or horticultural systems very far away from the rivers. And so those two things correspond. And then the cultural part of the bioregion is very stable in its connection to salmon runs and water. Even though if you ask, well, is Northern California part of it or not? If you're not thinking about the salmon and the hydrology, you can get all kinds of debates and confusion. And so the cultural part confuses what this ecological part makes clear, which is that there's a multi-thousand-year coherence to the hydrology and the fish, which allowed the types of cultural systems of that part of the planet to be stable for long periods of time. And then the human bioregion anchored itself to that. But if you don't know to look at these other anchors to see how the culture co-evolved with it, the cultural discourse, like should Northern California be a part or should Idaho be part, which is where all the contention is. But people like to focus where the drama is. And people who are part of the drama like to talk a lot. And people who are not part of the drama are annoyed and talk less. And so the discourse becomes populated with that little confusion. And so what that tells you is Peter Berg was right. Thank you, Peter Berg from the Planet Drum Foundation. That you start with your tectonic plate, which is what he did when someone would say, where are you from? He didn't say, I'm from San Francisco. He named his tectonic plate, and then he named the hydrology of the drainage for the Sacramento River from that tectonic plate as it connected to the San Francisco Bay Area that then connected to the specific place on the peninsula where he lived. And he anchored himself to geology. And then he looked at the cultural patterns of human subsistence anchored to the geology. And so it's really helpful when looking at an entire landscape to at least be sure that the geology is one of your design constraints. If you start with human culture, it's too mushy to see what stayed and what changed over long periods of time. But if you start with geology, it's such a profound anchor for how ecology works because of this thing called biogeography, which is different evolutionary convergences occur where certain kinds of ecosystems arise. They're always anchored to geology. They're not determined by it, but they're profoundly constrained and influenced by geology. And so when we talk about how do we think at a whole system level, if we're not accounting for geology, then we probably missed part of the system, which is why starting with a watershed may or may not be the right level. The watershed, if anchored to geology, may be the right one, but may not. So this is the confusion that I think that Claire is referring to, is that in practice, people don't know how to define their bioregions or their holistic landscape.
Why might a watershed not be, one of the first determining factors? Can you think of an example of where that would be not the case? Because it seems natural to me.
I'll give an example where we are in Barichara. We have three major rivers. There's Rio Fonce, which is the river that goes from the east to the west and goes through the village, goes through the city of San Gil. There's Rio Chicamocha, which goes to this big canyon just to our north, and they both empty into Rio Suarez, which goes by the indigenous name Rio Saravita. And Rio Suarez is the second largest river in Colombia. It starts near Bogota and it ends up emptying into Rio Sogamoso and then into Rio Magdalena. And Magdalena is the largest river. And so we could say, let's look at Rio Suarez. Well, Rio Suarez would go from Bogota to the Magdalena, which is about 700 miles. It's a big river. And it's going from south to north. And that doesn't, and you might include Rio Fonce and Rio Chicamocha as tributaries or as sub-branches of it. Or if you started with the watershed of Chicamocha, but you didn't account for all of Rio Suarez, see how the watersheds don't really make clear how the local ecology is constrained. Because in Colombia, you go 10 kilometers and the ecology changes pretty dramatically, which is why there's so much biodiversity here. And that's why I started with the regional climate system, which is defined by the mountain ranges. And I'll give you another piece of what happens here in Barichara. West of us is a mountain range that in English is called the Mountains of the Cowards, because the conquistadors decided to use a negative name for the people they couldn't conquer, who stayed in those mountains and were unconquerable. They called them cowards. The colonizers get to write history, so they get to do that sort of thing. And that mountain range to our west does cold air, it's a rain shadow. The mountain range is so tall that all of the rain falls onto those mountain ranges, and we're in a desert-like environment on the other side. But that cloud forest that is there where it gets rain every day of the year is where the birds go back and forth and define the unique tropical dry forest of our region, which is a blend of cloud forest plants with dry forest plants. And that cloud forest dry forest is why we have the only high Andes tropical dry forest on Earth. And that ecological connection of bird migration across the mountain range is fundamental for understanding the unique ecosystem we have, which says that this unique ecosystem, which is connected to the unique culture of this place, is actually the network of rivers embedded within the mountain ranges with ecological connections across the mountains. And that's just knowing the local ecology, knowing how the mountain range works, knowing how the climate system works, knowing how the hydrology and the river systems work, and knowing that the Guane people, the people that lived in this interior network of canyons, had a unique cultural system for 7,000 years. So it's the combining of all of those that tells us the geology of the three mountain ranges sets a unique climate system with very important migration patterns that shape the kind of ecosystem it is, connected to the hydrology of the river systems. But the river systems, for one sense, Rio Suarez goes beyond this bioregion. It enters it from the outside and it leaves it, because those are different bioregions. The Muisca people to the south, the Tairona to the north. And the ecology of this place that is unique is the convergence of geology, hydrology, and river systems and migration patterns or ecological connections. And it's all of them together that define this particular bioregion. So is that helpful?
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
Hope that helps, Claire. You started the question. Thanks,
But you
Joe.
can see how much you have to learn about your local place to say what the bioregion is. But the first approximation is, what is the ecology that defines the place? And are there longstanding indigenous cultural patterns of humans? Those are really good approximations. They may not get you to exactly the borders, but if you look at our example, high Andes tropical dry forest, Guane people overlapping in place, and it's a pretty good approximation. And so that's just a way of thinking about this.
Joe, can I just say that one of the things I'd love you to weave in is just how you integrate the coherence of the bioregion into the different groups so that they have a sense and can hold that.
Yeah, what might be helpful is to actually show a few pictures from the last 2 weeks, because that will take this from being what sounds like an intellectual conversation and really show us some of what's happening on the ground, and then we can apply this conversation to what we see happening on the ground. Does that feel like a good thing to do? And so what I'm going to do is, this will not be super organized, but I'll just share my screen and I'll go into OneDrive where I store a lot of photos. And here, and I'll just show you some of the pictures that were taken in the last 2 weeks. So our last call was on August 4th. So this is when the new ones start. Look at me and Elise. Okay. One thing that has been happening, and this is, I actually was not able to participate in the workshop in syntropic agroforestry, although Jacob was, so he could speak about it. But I'll just show you this, that this is a picture of, this is the site where the syntropic agroforestry workshop happened. This is in a rural zone called El Pino. El Pino is just Spanish for the pine tree. And no, there are not pine trees anywhere in El Pino. It's just a funny name. El Pino is the largest and most impoverished part of our territory and has the worst health problems for women and children. It's where all of the contaminated water runs to. So all of the black water that pours out of Barichara's tourist economy is given directly to the children of El Pino for them to drink and bathe in and get sick with and have cancer and other things. And so having this site be a place for doing agroforestry and teaching syntropy is strategic for a bunch of reasons. But I just wanted you to see, there's Paco in the black shirt on the right with his hat on. In front of him, facing away, is Oswaldo, who is a local ecologist who has done reforestation work in the region a lot and works at Origen del Agua. Most of the people you see in the picture are people, local campesino people from the area. And like I said, I don't actually have a lot of pictures because I wasn't there at the event. Although I have a few, or maybe I have a few. No, I don't know that they got loaded. But I just wanted you to see that that was a picture where they just set up basically it's like an agroforestry farm. And when we went to Acacia, which is pictures look like this, look how lush and rainforest like that is. If you can see back in the back of the image where my arrow is here, you'll see a waterfall coming down off the mountains. This is a place that is lush and green and full of water on the other side of Sand Hill, east of us. And they're a place that have done various kinds of organic farming. They have coffee plantation and grow cacao for chocolate. They have created ceremonial spaces for doing medicine ceremonies. And they do really beautiful work collaborating with their neighbors. They work with about 20 of their neighbors to do work parties and help each other on their land. And they've been working there for about 7 years in this capacity. And just to show you some of the people who were there, this was us in the morning. So there's Lilian, who's here on the call with us, talking with Gabriella, who does healing, trauma healing work in the community. Just a lot of people gathering, having a snack before we started the conversations that we had. Of course, there are always dogs around. But just so you can sort of see a little bit of people smiling, Lilian and Gabriella, such good friends, who both do work with taking a course with Thomas Hubel and doing some interesting trauma healing work that's very aligned that Lilian could speak to if she likes. This is called a maloca, which is actually an Amazonian style of community house that was constructed with bamboo at Acacia, where they hold ceremonies and have community events. And we had some community activities there during the day we were there. This is Marlo and Paola, who are the family that own and run Acacia and are really the heart and soul of it. They're really wonderful people who started teaching themselves permaculture about 7 years ago, went off grid, total back to the land types, and have just done beautiful work figuring out how to support themselves growing organic coffee and chocolate while learning and teaching permaculture practices. And so this is one of the spaces. They do a lot of bamboo construction on their land. And this is Marlo teaching how they set up their tree nursery, how they do composting, how it relates to their different food production systems. And all of the participants, all the people who are here, were participants of the first Syntropic Agroforestry workshop. So the weaving of this is people learning syntropy or visiting each other's land, but because different pieces of land have different things to teach, everyone is teaching each other as a learning community. And we're connecting to the territory simply by traveling to different places in the territory. So that's why I wanted to just show you a couple of pictures of this. This is some of the cacao that they grow for making chocolate that they grow on their finca. And one thing that, and this is a beautiful grasshopper that I saw when we were there. The biodiversity of this landscape is truly incredible. So that is a type of grasshopper. Viva Colombia. Colombia is number 5 in the world for biodiversity, for those who don't know. And so the biodiversity here is just overwhelming. Then another thing that happened the next week was, this was a group of parents gathering with these 2 women on the left, which I think I have a better picture of here. On the left is Milena, and on your left is Milena, and on your right in the blue is Mago. And Milena and Mago are both school teachers who specialize in emotional and social development of children. They both are very connected to nature. Mago actually does medicine ceremonies with cacao and other sacred plants of Meso and South America. And they are creating an after-school program for children to teach social and emotional development and nature connection, which they started last week. But Milena, there on the left, I cultivated her passion for weaving educators in the community. And she's now on staff, in quotes, there is no staff, but she's being funded by the Barichara Fund right now for a 3-month period to engage in social weaving for all the people doing regenerative education with children and families in the territory, while also offering this after-school program. And so the parents are there with their little kids. This was just the informational meeting where we were all learning. This is Catalina and her son Mateo, practicing how to blow out a candle because Mateo wanted to do that. And so the kids coming to this kind of activity is connected to the deep intergenerational work we're doing. And then the next week, or the same week actually, the kids that go to Elisa's alternative school, a place called Totumo, did a field site visit to the food forest where I've been leading the work and creating a food forest in the Bioparque. And look at what this, well, that's just a pitaya. The kids had their lunch, and then did they want to learn about trees and forests? No. They wanted to jump across this big ditch that Tyler Wakefield dug. Yeah, this little girl's name is Azul, and she's even cuter than this picture looks in real life. But I just wanted you to see what happens when the kids enter a food forest and how important it is that they don't care that it's a food forest. How important it is they don't care about the climate crisis. How important it is they don't care about survival with food. They just want to play. And that's Gabrielle. And so the kids are there playing. Another picture of Azul, because I was holding her hand a lot, and we're good friends. But I just wanted to see the kids playing, climbing in the trees. What does this have to do with weaving a bioregion? Absolutely everything is the answer. And so I just wanted you to see some of these kids' activities, including that Camila, who was one of the founders of the Bioparque, came and showed the kids some of the plants during this field site visit. And it was really hot, so some of the kids stripped off their shirts, and then they got water from our rainwater harvesting systems and started splashing on themselves. For those of you who know Margarita, the famous Margarita, this is her son Luca, dousing himself with water to stay warm, stay cool. And so yeah, you can just see the kids doing their thing, and then the kids doing a workshop on how to work with natural materials. In this case, they're painting with mud. Oh, that's a video, so I don't show that one. I'm not sure what's in that video, but just so you can see that all of this activity with the kids connects back to what the adults are doing. This is the same Centropic Agroforestry project in Alpino another time. If you look around somewhere in there, it's Jacob, I think. And this is them coming back to do maintenance. So after the 3-day workshop, they came back again the following week to start learning how to do soil improvement and other technical maintenance skills. And so we're weaving the adults while weaving the children in parallel. Now, while all of this is happening, we also have all of the work with the Territorial Foundation. And so we had a really important gathering. These two women are Tanya on the left and Ceci on the right, who are really involved in the Centropic Agroforestry work. They're the two key organizers of the workshops. And we were gathered together with a bunch of us to map out the legal framework for the Territorial Foundation, holding our awareness of all the work we're doing with the Centropic Agroforestry. This is Emilce, who creates the absolutely transformational work with children and cultural healing. Who's creating a community theater. And she is now helping us map out the territorial patterns to hold within the Territorial Foundation, bringing all of her work with the kids in the community. This is Jose, who is one of the facilitators, and saying that he wants to sign up as one of the founders. Fundadores means the people who are listed on the legal registry when we document the foundation. We need a minimum of 3 founders, and we have about a dozen. All of us, we call this Fundadores de Corazón, the heart founders. We're the peoples who hold the heart and the spiritual purpose of the Territorial Foundation. So that's who all signed this during this gathering. And here, look, that Felipe brought his son Alun. So that little boy sitting there is just sitting and listening in as we're weaving the Territorial Foundation into being. And so all of this work is happening in parallel with everything else. And then, of course, for those of you who remember Oriental Agua, Oswaldo, who I'd mentioned earlier, he and Jessica and a few people doing work parties, Jacob has been really going and sweating and digging holes, have been going to Origen del Agua, which of course we raise money for through Earth Regenerators, put in a cactus garden, started applying syntropic agroforestry principles, because now both Jessica and Oswaldo, and actually Jacob too, have all been trained in syntropic agroforestry. And these are some of the syntropic principles of planting. This is a garden bed in the syntropic model for creating cactus plants to hold water from the air and put them to the ground at Origen del Agua. So you can just see this. This is Penny when I went to visit. Lilian was with us, but I don't know if I took a picture of her while we were there that day. But Lilian did take a picture of me. So just so you know, I was there, looking kind of shadowy and a little bit like a country redneck of Colombia. And so I'm just showing you all of this to give you a feel for how these activities that are just ongoing all the time in the community are why we can hold the territory. And so and these are all the things, like I said, I don't have pictures of the activities that I wasn't a part of when I was spending so much of my time doing the visa process. And so I'm only showing you Joe's camera view. There is so much more going on, but even just what I can see, you can start to see how we weave the patterns by having the women who are working with the kids become part of how we shape how the foundation is set up, how the people who are managing the workshops in syntropic agroforestry and connecting into cultivating campesino youth leadership are also helping design the foundation, that the people who are doing the on-the-ground technical work of planting and growing things are participating in the process as well, that the territorial patterning is sort of endogenous. There's no outside of the process. So I just wanted to show you some of those pictures, because I think it starts to show a little bit more concretely that when we talk about how do we bring the territorial pattern. First of all, are there any questions right now? Because I'm about to go into an example to sort of answer Claire's request of sort of going behind the scenes and showing some of the quiet work. But before I do that, are there any questions?
Claire put a question in the chat. That's a good question.
About the core team? Yes, I'll come back to that one in a moment. How do we define the makeup of the core team? And just for those of you who don't know, the phrase core team is taken from the common land landscape investment model. So I'll connect those dots for all of us in a moment. I want to give the story of Milena, because the story of Milena shows how we're cultivating a territorial pattern within a human being who is not in the territory, but is arriving to the territory, but is arriving in a way that I could intuit as a weaver that she may stay and become part of a future core team. So this starts to get at the behind the scenes part and a little bit about core teams. And then I'll come back and show how the core teams work, or at least a little bit about how they work. So Milena, let me just go back and show you all the picture of Milena again, so you see what I'm talking about. Milena is down here. Where is she? This is a good picture of Milena, right here. So Milena is this woman in the black pants, sitting there smiling, looking down. I want you to notice two things about Milena from the picture. One is, doesn't she look like the Buddha? Like she's smiling inward and just full of happiness. That's not accidental. And the other thing you can see is that, doesn't she just look like someone you want to be friends with? That's also not an accident. She is so amazing at being the living emotional scaffold for children and parents to teach them emotional well-being. It's completely in her body. So I just want you to see her, to see why what I'm about to say that I intuited was so easy to see. So I'll just tell you a little bit about Milena. So Milena spent the last 6 or 7 years, she's fairly young, probably in her mid-20s, last 6 or 7 years being an elementary school teacher, being an education coordinator. She just spent the last year or last 6 months in Spain while finishing a master's degree in cognitive neuroscience focused on emotional development in children. and really honing in on not only how to manage and create safe spaces for children, but how their brains process and how their brains integrate with their immune systems. And she's like deeply learning that space. And she decided that she never wants to be a school teacher or an education coordinator again. Because she also had a personal life transformation last year with medicine ceremonies and sacred connection. And she's beginning her shamanic path as a young Colombian woman. And so, so Milena was here last year. She offered an afternoon program 3 days a week to a group of 10 kids, structuring their emotional development. And Elise was enrolled in that. So I met Milena by seeing how good Milena was at creating pro-social environments for little kids. And because I've studied some of the best practices in childhood development related to pro-social, especially things related to the good behavior game, for any of you who might know what that is, I saw Milena embody those practices in the way she worked with the kids. She created structures that supported the emotional development of kids. She created cooperative games so the kids learned cooperation instead of competition. She focused on that. She named her after-school program Florecemos, which is We Flourish Together. And so it was really clear to me that she was a keeper. That if there was a way that we could keep her in the community with the kids, all the parents would want that. And during the time she was here last year, she worked with Felipe and Alejandra, who are the people that initially brought Jessica and me to Barichara, who do some of the most amazing work with kids. And so Milena was mentoring with Felipe and Alejandra about spiritual approaches to nature connection in the John Young School, the Coyote School, which Felipe knows well, and Theory U and presencing and how to facilitate emergence, and shamanic practices with medicine ceremonies, with nature walks and bioregionalism, because Felipe does all that stuff. And so Milena was already attuned to that. But then she left and went to Europe. 6 months in Spain, a couple months in Czechoslovakia, and came back. And as she was coming back, Penny and I were dealing with a little moment of, we would really like someone to give emotional support to Elise, as Penny has arrived and Elise is realizing Jessica and I are never going to live in the same house again. And we could see Elise grieving some of that. And I thought, oh my gosh, if Milena was here, she would be the personal tutor I would hire, because she's so good at that and Elise already knows her. And I thought, but I don't want to just do that for me. I'd be like the rich family doing a nice thing for myself. We actually need this for everyone in the territory. Notice, Clara, what I did there. Everyone in the territory needs this. And then I just said to Felipe the next day, because I saw him, hey, Felipe, I think it'd be amazing if we could find someone that could cultivate this capacity for the community and help us with what Elise needs for our family. Do you know what's going on with Milena? I haven't heard from her. And he said, I just talked to her the other day and she's coming back in 3 weeks. And I was like, oh, wow, if Milena is coming back in 3 weeks, that means she doesn't know what she's doing yet. And maybe we can shape what she's doing as she arrives. Hey, Felipe, can I have a conversation with you? Notice the weaver, bring in the territorial pattern. And Felipe is very much bioregional. Benji, wait till you meet him, oh my God. And so, so Felipe and I sit down together one day in the forest behind my house. And Felipe says, Joe, you know, after helping facilitate the Territorial Foundation, because Felipe and Jose facilitated 3 sessions, 3 design workshops in June, he said, you know, having you create this solution for your family and maybe 2 or 3 other families, that's okay. But I actually think we need to create a series of design workshops in the community for education of children and families that Jose, who's amazing, could facilitate, but that really couldn't happen until October. So if you're going to talk to Milena about this, think about a larger community dialogue that it might fit into. See how Felipe brought the territorial pattern. And I immediately noticed, oh, that's what we call a community fund in our model of a foundation. Our foundation forms and convenes an alliance of people around a theme, and then they create a community philanthropy model of multi-capital exchanges, which is called a community fund. And maybe Milena could help cultivate that because she's a free agent. She's not committed to anything yet. So when I said, oh, Felipe, that's great. Would you give me Milena's contact? I lost it. when Milena arrives, I want to talk to her. And then Milena arrives, and I have this conversation with her about planetary collapse, what the children need, how our schools aren't delivering it, how all the educational offerings are great, but none of them get there, how we really need someone who could hold a community dialogue. Notice the core team holding the process. How someone could hold the process of weaving the educators and the families and the kids. And how would she feel if I found the funding for her to just do that without needing money? Well, of course, this sort of like fucked with her mind a little bit. She didn't know, Penny was there. Penny, you gonna laugh? Okay, that pretty much says enough, right? Milena was like, I understood about half of that and I need to take a walk. And Milena, she's a smart kid, but you know, this is all new to her. So then she came back a couple of days later and said, so you're talking about making me into a commons where I don't need money and I don't have any work obligations. I just act in service to the community. And I said, yeah, we did that with people for Centropic Agroforestry. People did that with me with Patreon, and that's why Earth Regenerators exist. This is a model that really works. Make someone into a commons and they can hold the process. She's like, this sounds amazing. And I've never heard of it before. I'm gonna go take another walk and talk to some people. And then the third time we met, I'd also asked her to tell me exactly what was in her heart to do and exactly what she would need to do it. You can guess which part was the hard part, how much money to ask for. Everyone, that's the hardest part. The psychology around money is so fucked up. It's such a mess. That was the last thing we dealt with. And then I met with her one day in the food forest in the bioparque, and we sat on a rock and we talked. Actually, Jacob was there pulling grass because he just gotten back from his meditation retreat and needed to pull some grass. The meditation retreat to recover from the meditation retreat. And Milena and I sat on a rock in the sanctuary, and she, like a school teacher does, had her list of bullet points that she had to walk through of everything that was in her heart to do with the children. And she just named it all, and it was beautiful. And it was just what the community needs, and how she could weave it with all the educational offerings, how she could just devote part of her time to this after school program, and that we'd actually create funding for a community fund because they would still charge the parents to enroll in it. But because she's covered, that money would become the beginning, like a seed fund for the community. And she would have free time because she wouldn't have to find other work. So she could start talking with the other educators and the other families about their needs. And that we would weave this into a series of community design workshops in October. And at the end, she said she wanted to do this for 3 months as a trial run and how much money she needed. And then we were good. And I said, deal, when do you want to start? Tomorrow? Okay, I'll go to the ATM machine and get you some money. It was like, boom. And so you see how she's modeling part of the core team, how my ability as a weaver to sense into what the field needs, to proactively recruit it and cultivate it, to role model the regenerative financial models, the regenerative livelihood models, the collaborative commons models in an interpersonal way with a single human being, who then becomes transformed by the process and is now on the road, if she stays, to eventually being part of the core team, maybe. Right now, she's trial running it for 3 months. And so why do I say she might become part of the core team? Because she might not. She might stay and live here for the rest of her life and do education work with family and children's, but not be on the core team. Because she may not end up working on the integrated landscape scale. And so, so I want to just stop there though and just address any questions or comments people have about what this story reveals about how, like, notice I didn't ask anyone permission. Pretty much no one knew what I was doing. All the other people who are on the core team have just realized that I just keep bringing beautiful things like Milena. Like, here's this beautiful woman who's an amazing asset to the community. I've been cultivating her capacities and bringing money from the outside, and she's here to do work for us now. And they're like, great, keep going. How much trust, how much emergence, how much improvisation is connected to this, and how this territorial weaving process really cannot know one moment to the next what it's doing. there's a scale at which it can. There's a container that's always coherent. But did I know 2 months ago that I was going to be cultivating Milena as a community asset? No. But my family's need for Elise and my understanding of family traumas and developmental challenges for kids and families, which had already been prepared by 3 years of being here, knew that if someone like Milena arrived, she would be a morphic fit. She would structurally fit to what's needed. And so I could see my family's need connected to territorial need, and I moved toward the territory instead of doing something for myself. Which, by the way, Milena probably wouldn't have been very interested in being a babysitter for Elise, even though she loves Elise. She would want Elise to be part of her education program. And so the fit between the two sides needs to be there. So are there any questions or commentaries, things we could clarify more about that example?
I have a question. Thank you for sharing that. I have what is the psychological sort of jump or step that people tend to make going from a typical model where you think I'm going to do some work and get a salary to I'm a community asset and I don't earn a salary in the same way, but I get funded to do the work? That is quite a leap. And I just wondered if you could share a bit more about how they kind of get themselves there.
Yeah, Jacob, did you want to add on to that before I respond?
I mean, you can go if you want. I mean, I'm literally going through that process right now, more or less, I would say.
Well, share your story and then I'll comment after.
All right. So, I mean, basically what happened 4 or 5 months ago is that I walked up to the Bioparque and started talking with Joe and we hit it off. And I thought, maybe I'll stay here. And after I told Joe about that, he was, okay, if you really want to, I can help you get a visa and we'll find a way for you to stay here. And so slowly I moved from having like an official volunteering relationship where it's not money-based, but at least still, you know, you get food and a place to stay for this specific amount of work you do at a specific place at a specific time. And now during the last few months, that has mostly transformed into I just walk around the community, meet with people and offer help when I find a project that I find interesting, and then basically get called up on helping out. Like for the last Centropic Agroforestry workshop, I was mostly helping to prepare the food, carry things around, use my height because I'm 2 meters tall to put up the police sombra, that sort of stuff. And the analogy that I use for that right now, where I'm basically just trusting, okay, there's going to be work here for me to do. And because I am helping many people in the community, there will always be a place for me to sleep, basically, somehow, because the relationships have been cultivated, is making the step from living in the kind of, okay, we're going to have a job, work in the city, prepare the food through money and so on, to, okay, I'm going to become a hunter-gatherer. I'm just going to trust in the fact that there is abundance in the ecosystem, and that even though I can't assure that there will be a big harvest of fruits in the next season, it's been that way until now, and it's kind of worked. So you just keep on trusting and it keeps on flowing. And creating that kind of trust into, if you have a rich community that works well together, it's just kind of going to work out, even though you never have 100% certainty on that. That's how the transformation has been for me, and it brings a lot of uncertainty and insecurity sometimes, and I think you can get used to that to some degree, and then the rest is basically by trusting in your relationships. That's at least been the journey for me. Yeah.
Jacob, that's a beautiful explanation of the process. I don't think I have anything more to add at the moment, but I want to know if Paula has something to add or a question, either way.
Yeah, it's just I might not, what I have to say is might not be very pertinent, but it's the coincidence is that this morning I was just reading a document on this specific question of Irvi, and because as some of you might know, I'm like part of a of an effort to make a document on regenerative funding governance. And among the things that we did in the team, there was a funding process of, okay, how much money do you need for your work? And yesterday we were asked to submit the feedback, because it was not exactly, it was not, you know, the conventional way of, okay, my hourly rate is this, and you know, in my corporate environment, we do it like this. We were supposed to like be, it only worked if we departed from that, and it forced us to depart from that. So it's, I think it's part of the regenerative. Most of us, I mean, I think all of us had problems and had like these adjustment period. And I do, for some of us, it's not even over, you know, how to change your mindset, your mental model around getting money, and how it's a very good question. And I think it's Jacob's answer is amazing. And I also think there's value in staying with that question and exploring potential answers to those questions. Yeah, that's what I had to say.
Now, Paula, I think that really helps, because the key to all of this, which maybe isn't a surprise with everything else we talked about, is to create commons. We create commons. And remember, commons are not static, they're dynamic. And so just like a river is a commons, rivers are not static. And so what Jacob was describing about continually being supported in the flow of relationships means that there is a community commons. And the problem for most of us is we live in places where there is not a community commons. And so we can't do this. And what's been interesting is every Colombian I've spoken to where I've helped create this arrangement this year, Margarita would be the exception that's doing it for a family instead of an individual. Everyone said the same number. It was like, what do you think is, I would just say, what do you need to cover your expenses where you would not just feel like you're being taken advantage of, you wouldn't feel like a volunteer, you'd feel good. And every one of them said 3 million pesos, which is about 700 US dollars. And so each of them, that's how much Tanya and Ceci are being paid per month. That's how much Milena asked for. And so it's just interesting that all of them said 3 million. That's how much Paco is being paid to teach the workshops in Syntropic Agroforestry. And what I know is that that amount of money is a step, not a conclusion. It's a step in a process. I actually think they need more money than that. But the question was not how much money do you need indefinitely into the future. Every time it was within a time frame for a purpose that was their purpose in their heart. And I think all of us can agree that if we're invited to be supported, to be like, be an artist and do the thing in your heart to do, you'd say, I don't need much money, just pay for my food and my housing, right? And so people just ask for their basic needs, and that's been consistent. But when we focus on the core team, which remember from the common land model, the core team is a thriving economic capacity for a minimum of 20 years for 15 or 20 people who hold a landscape. That's different from how much money do you need to be in service to the community for the next 3 to 6 months. And so I don't want that number, that 3 million pesos per month or $700 a month, to say, and therefore that is the number that we pay people forever. That's not how this arrangement was set up. It was, in this moment, would you do this deeply meaningful thing and be loved and supported for an agreed period of time that you set, and how much would you need to do it? That was the context of the conversation each time. So there really is an art of creating this context. The very first person I did this with Margarita and her husband Donnie back in January, when we raised the money for them to be supported for a year to start transforming everything. And that has paid off, and Margarita actually is going to request to stop being paid after this month. And so that means some of the money that was lost when crypto crashed, which was largely covering her, will actually be recovered by not needing to pay her for the second half of it, because she's shifting her mode, having sort of graduated from that model in a way. which is a whole story we could tell. It's kind of amazing. But then the second set of people were the people doing syntropic agroforestry. And then the third is Milena, who is sort of like just another person doing it. And I'm finding out how to engage someone in the conversation, what the sequence is, how to open their heart, how like every one of these people is just like completely filled with gratitude. I mean, imagine if someone comes up to you and says, I think you're such a beautiful member of this community. I want you to be fully supported to give the thing you most love to the community without worrying about money. And have a team. And they're like, I don't even know how to respond to that, which has been what's happened every time. And so this is a key part of the weaving process. So I could talk about the core team now and the landscape fund and how it relates to the pledge community and the refi event. I think I could hold all of those in one dialogue, which I think will be a helpful shift for us to use the next little bit of time. But I want to ask, are there any other things that we should talk about before we move? Are there any other questions?
I just have to make this comment, Joe. You know, I was looking at Claire's comment there in chat. You know, we're in a transition period here. We're creating and setting a new paradigm. You know, all this stuff that you're talking about just right now. You know, soon I think that these kinds of conversations are going to be more. It won't be so dramatic. It'll be easy it'll be more normalized. And I think that it just takes these leaps of faith, these moves into trust, you know, step by step, little by little. That these are great examples. But I think that as we go, we're going to normalize something much different than what we've seen with the Western capitalistic, you know, societies. Those norms and cultures are going to fade to the background, and this notion of giving to the community is going to be, you know, our life's purpose. It's like what we do naturally. We're not looking to go make a bunch of money. It doesn't mean anything. It won't mean anything anymore eventually. So I'm going to stop there. I just wanted to throw that in. Thanks. Please continue.
Hallelujah. And can I get an amen? I mean, damn. I'm totally with you there, Dan. Totally with you. I think everyone here has been their own version of the starving artist at some point in time, you know, where we just needed to do something super important to us and we couldn't because we didn't have the support we needed. And then we had to watch the beautiful thing die. I think every one of us has dealt with some version of that in our lives. So this is really important. So I want to talk a little bit about what's happening with this landscape investment model, the pledge community, and the refi event, which are all connected in really interesting and indirect ways to the transitions that are occurring in Earth regenerators. So there's actually a really complex field of interdependencies. And I will not go into all of it. Antonio, you have so many cool stories in China. Damn. Everyone should just go have beers with Antonio and hear stories about China. And you should go have those conversations October 3rd through 7th in Barichara. Anyway, we'll get to that.
I offer to make anybody who wants one an omelet.
Thank you, Antonio. What I wanted to tell just a little bit of the story of what's happening is that I spent 2.5 years holding the intention of bringing common land to Barichara. And because of the pandemic, it was delayed. And Willem Verweerde arrived here 2 weeks, well, a little over 2 weeks ago. This was 3 weeks ago. It was 2 weeks ago I told the story of his visit. And just what I thought would happen, happened, which is that Willem gave me the inside scoop about how common land really works, which was that they do not approach any landscape. They wait for landscapes to have a team that forms that is a landscape team, that Common Land recognizes as a landscape team. And that landscape team comes to Common Land and says, we want to be a landscape with you because your model of the 4 returns, your model of integrated landscape investment, your model of the 3 zones, these things are useful to us. And your networks and connections to help us with fundraising, to help us with publicity, to collaborate in that network, that would be helpful to us. And basically anyone who says that, it's like the door was never closed. The door was open, but they had to walk through it. And it's up to us to walk through it. And I had sort of suspected that because I know Theory U and Presencing Institute and those kinds of things. I've known people from that space for more than a decade. I had sensed that, but I was waiting for Common Land. I was waiting for Willem to confirm it. And when Willem told me that, I was like, oh, okay. So I just told Natalia, because Natalia is our sort of Little Miss Amazing of Barichara. She's like a global citizen asset for regeneration of the planet. Those of you who haven't met Natalia yet, when you come and you meet her, you'll see what I'm talking about. She blew Willem away. You think Willem's hard to blow away. We look at someone like her, and I say to her, Natalia, we have basically an open door with Common Land, but we have to just get our shit together that we have to ask them. She's like, all right, let's get the Territorial Foundation in place. Let's start convening the territorial dialogues that have already been happening, shape them around this. And I said, don't worry, what I'm going to do is create the landscape investment model, because I'm doing the fundraising at the moment. And the place we're going to start is the pledge community. Why? Because the pledge community is where people have already committed $1,000 to help the Barichara Ecoversity happen, which means it's a place where there are people who could engage in action to implement this landscape investment model, because they're already putting their money where their mouth is in some way. And so that doesn't mean that that's the only people that can participate, but that's just where we start. It's like, these are people who really want to see this happen, so they'll step in further. And so the way that happened was like this. I gave the final webinar of the last learning journey, I'm doing, which was after I'd shared the video of me no longer giving learning journeys in ER and focusing on Barichara. And one thing that happened, as Lilian could describe, is there have been months of confusion in the ER fund governance group, months of confusion about what is the relationship between the ER fund and the Barichara fund. And no one could quite answer it. And one place they got really sticky was some people in that ER fund governance group said we should have fiscal sponsorship to receive money in the US with tax exemption. And Jonathan Cloud had said, well, our nonprofit, Possible Planet, could do that. And then they talked about all of that and they created this contract and they said, who would sign the fiscal sponsorship agreement for ER? Well, obviously Joe would, because if anyone was in like the CEO position of ER, it'd be Joe. And I was like, wait, I actually wasn't part of any of these conversations. And while I understand why you'd ask me to sign this, I'm not sure I should be the person to sign this. And it was all confusing. And Jonathan didn't really know what was going on. And because there were key things that just hadn't happened. And when he saw me say what I was clarifying in my role, he said, you know, what I really want to do is help Barichara become a success, to bring that back to everything in ER. So if there's anything I can do, I want to invert my invitation. His previous invitation was, I'll offer fiscal sponsorship, but this is the normal way we do it. Instead, he said, throw all that out. I want to gift fiscal sponsorship. And in the spirit of the gift, I will not set an amount of money for this fiscal sponsorship. But if we help you raise money and use our fiscal sponsorship, you will decide in the spirit of the gift what you want to give us to show appreciation. And what I really want to do is this Common Land model. I want to help with that. And I was like, fucking A, man, we got our action team. Let's start building let's create the materials for funding a $500,000 ask for Barichara. And you see how the ER fund governance group, some of this confusion, all of it sort of fell away in the moment. Those confusions will return, but they'll return as moments of clarity in the process as we're clarifying all the other moving parts, because it's really confusing right now. But that means the pledge community, which, by the way, the two people who were the first people to step into the pledge community, Rachel Olson and Jonathan Cloud, during an ER fund governance meeting. They were the first two people to join the pledge. Do you know who was number 3? Antonio. Do you know who's number 4? Gregory Landaway, the founder and director of Region Network. And Antonio and Greg would just keep saying, oh, I want to learn from that. I want to be a part of that. And they step in and bring their networks. But showing that the ER Fund Governance Group was where the pledge community was born, very paradoxically, and then connected to Refi and the Refi event we're doing, which Antonio and Gregory are very connected to. None of this is an accident. Because I've known from the very beginning that we need to create real world prototypes at the bioregional scale and then distribute it across the world using Earth regenerators, which is why I very actively stepped into helping Benji as much as I could with the creation of bioregional catalysts. Because I knew we were all going to need him doing that. Right? And when we started talking about ER fellows, who was the first recipient of an ER fellowship? Well, before it was called that, it was Rachel to come to Barichara. The first one we officially called it was Benji. So he could go to Maine, which means all of this stuff about building this network has all been in the field. It's just been unclear. And so what's starting to happen right now is this. We have created the first draft of a fundraising ask for $500,000 for Barichara, where $250,000 is to regenerative projects in the community for like 2 years. $150,000 is for the off-grid campus on Las Albercas so that we can start to build what I haven't talked about much, a center for appropriate technology, and an off-grid campus that is net zero energy and water. That becomes an anchor place after the land purchase is done. And then $100,000 to support the core team for probably 2 years as we do the rest of the fundraising to build the capacities for what Common Land says we actually need. And so last week we started that by me writing an article that laid that out, by Possible Planet setting up the mechanisms for them to have a separate bank account for the Barichara work connected to Possible Planet. We now have a PayPal link that people can donate money to. The pledge community is starting to give their pledge money into Possible Planet. All of these things are connected to Territorial in Colombia, being able to receive the money on our behalf. The fiscal sponsorship agreement we're finalizing now, as the Territorial Foundation is going through the process of being legally established. So all this infrastructure is being created. And those pictures I showed you of the kids playing, of Milena and Mago teaching them, of the Centropic agroforestry workshops, of all of the work on the foundation, all of that is interwoven with the storytelling we need to do to successfully raise this money. And how successfully raising this money will allow us to tell this story to a lot more people. And then connected to all of that is the refi event, which at this point, I'll tell you a little, and then I'll invite Antonio to tell a little more. The refi event, which is October 3rd through 7th, here in Barichara, sandwiched between the Cosmoverse event in Medellin the week before and DevCon in Bogota the week after, which are two huge crypto events with a lot of regenerative finance people blended in with there's a big sort of chaotic mix of refi people there and Web3 and crypto people, and a tiny, tiny sliver of them are regenerative. But all of them will be at those events. And we now have confirmation that core leadership of Regen Network and Regen Foundation are coming to Barichara. They are going to host workshops as part of our event. They're going to design into our space how to measure value chains, create community currencies, design tokens. A lot of the work Chad was here helping to seed when he was here before, and Chad's coming back for it. Aren't you, Chad? I hope so. Please come back. And so in a way, the work that the Cello Foundation that funded me, that allowed me to fund Chad to come here, and that work allowed us to have a conversation with Cello Foundation, which connects to, yay, Chad, I hope you come. That connects back to all these other things. Key people from Cello Foundation and Cello.org are already coming to our event. Key people from Refi Spring, which is a network of regenerative finance events around the world. Several of them are coming to our event to create coherence to the other events around the world. And there are more that I'll let Antonio share because it changes every day who our alliances are. And we're structuring an event that currently has a limit of 100 people who can attend, and that is going to be mostly self-organized. As soon as we have all of the pieces in place where we have one link to one page where you hear about it, can sign up and pay to enroll, I will post that on Earth Regenerators to invite Earth Regenerators to come. I've already told everyone in the pledge community that they can come to it, which means they don't actually need to be part of that 100 if it fills up. Because for me, the pledge community is an anchor of action between Earth Regenerators, the refi space, and the Barichara work. where we're going to be doing fundraising between now and the event. And all the publicity of the event will allow us to publicize our landscape funding package. And one of our goals is to raise the $500,000 through the event. And then at the event, show the collaborative process that raised that money to show how the refi world could use crypto tools to gather liquidity pools and direct them toward projects like this for other projects in the future. Are you listening, bioregional catalysts? We want to create the capacities to pool and direct resources toward landscapes while collaborating with common land and eco-agriculture partners and other players like them. While all of the Earth Regenerator stuff continues happening and all the on-the-ground work in Barichara continues happening. And that's what this whole refi event is about. It's about creating a weave from an incredible potential in a unique moment in time where this is possible to do, which I want to ask Antonio to speak about for a moment. So Antonio, if you're not out getting street food with omelets, I'd love to hear a little of your thoughts.
No, I'm staying indoors. There's a crazy Srirako wind front that comes from Africa this time of year, and it causes a lot of damage and forest fires. So it's like, it is an oven, but this is the time the alchemy happens. So I'm happy to say that for Refi Spring, applying for their support, we've been given 2,000 CUSD, which is the stable coin on the Cello network. So we have that to support the event staff. And I think it's great. Jacob's been helping so much with the event organizing and with the website and with the social media and all that stuff, figuring out how we can get some of that funds into your personal wallet as well. And we can discuss more about that in our weekly organizer call, which is turning out to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so I just wanted to give you this larger context not because it's all clear, because it's absolutely not, but just so that you can feel the field. I just want you to feel the field. The field is a moment of potential transformational convergence. And like when Tyler came the other day, and we're playing, he's really good at playing with Elise, by the way. We were talking about all this stuff. So I'd love to give Tyler a moment to share what your first couple of days have been like.
Yeah, it's just been amazing. I mean, sitting here and listening to what you just said, Joe, it's such a beautiful, experience being down here. I just feel an immense amount of gratitude, and really, I'm just so still new to all this. I only joined Earth Regenerators like 8 months ago, and before that, I knew a little bit about this whole kind of worldview, but not anything like what I've learned in the last 8 months. So in many ways, I feel like a little chick, a little bird at the edge of the nest, and just going a step beyond that boundary. And it's just been, I've been here for about 2.5 days, and I mean, just the feel of this entire place, the community, and the slowness of it is just, it's so much more different than just a fast-paced existence. Right before I was here, I was in San Francisco, and driving through San Francisco, and then I'm constantly just thinking about well, this is what's so wrong about our contemporary society. It's just like this and that, and then my mind is constantly kind of in this critical analysis mode, and then just going here, all that's kind of just fallen away, and it's just been so much more deliberate, slow emergence, and that's kind of the way I'm approaching this, because I don't have like a whole lot of background, like Antonio or Chad, like I don't have a whole lot to bring to this in that sense, but I'm really using this as a way to just kind of see what emerges within me as I engage, in the various projects around here. Joe just showed me around the Bioparque yesterday, which was really fantastic. Just wonderful sights, and it's just amazing. So yeah, I'm very grateful, and I'm very excited to see what comes about through this experience.
Yeah, and Jacob was his guide to Oriental Agua yesterday too.
Yes, yeah, that was wonderful too.
Denise, anything like that? No. So I'm just noticing that we're like in 1 hour and 20 minutes. So I just want to ask, are there any questions or topics we should explore in the use of the next few minutes?
Claire keeps asking really good questions in the chat. She brought up elder, how did you put it, Claire? Several people I know, some in ER, who do not have any family or others who might step in to look after them in their vulnerability, are wondering about this leap of faith into trusting that if they keep living their heart's purpose, will they be looked after when they can no longer look after themselves?
You know, it's sort of unfortunate that Kathy isn't here today because she could speak to her experience of that as a woman in her mid-70s who is here in Barichara right now and feeling some of that. It'd be very interesting to ask her reflections. One thing that I'm seeing is the explicit invitation of intergenerational patterns, explicitly inviting it, not just welcoming it if it shows up, but actually being like, hey, we think intergenerational stuff is super important. Like Antonio is probably laughing about when he was teaching Camila and Vicky about cryptocurrency. Like the intergenerational, the bi-directional learning, it's so important. Because two people that joined us, this was a funny thing, is when I started working with Milena, and she asked for 3 million pesos, you know, $700 a month for 3 months, do the math, 700 times 3 is $2,100. I did my little game on Twitter. Would anyone like to donate $2,000 to support the creation of a community fund for regenerative education of children in Barichara? I just posted that tweet. That's 140 characters. And then what happened was there this wonderful couple, Brian and Susan, that I did not know, that live in Toronto, that have been following me for a little while. They're kind of like fans of the stuff we do. They're just lurking. And they're like, wait, this is exactly what we do, because they have a project called the Legacy Project, where they work with Indigenous groups in the Toronto area. And they bring the 7 generations approach to multi-generational learning in one of the big suburbs outside of Toronto. And they had a grant working with a local university where they had enough budget that they were like, we could allocate $2,000 of our budget to supporting this process in Barichara, just so that we can tell the story of it happening to the people in Toronto who need to see this. And then I had a call with them when they told me that's what they wanted to do. And I said, do you guys want to join the pledge community? Because you're given $2,000. That meets the criteria. And they're like, yes, please. And I said, would you mind if I invited a couple of people from the pledge community who are already really interested in education and kids to have a conversation around how we can fundraise together around a community fund within our Territorial Foundation for kids and families? And some of you probably saw that I posted that video recording in ER. That's how Brian and Susan showed up, because I wrote a tweet and they gave $2,000, and I wove them into the pledge community and then wove them into targeted fundraising for the Territorial Foundation around multi-generational learning to start prototyping how we could raise the $500,000 at 2 levels at once, funding the whole landscape and funding focused areas, both at the same time. And so just wanted to tell that little bit of the story, because this multiple generation piece is everywhere in what we're doing. You know, when I showed you the picture of the kids playing and then showed you the adults in this entropic agroforestry system, that juxtaposition is really helpful to say it was intentional. We intentionally put the adult learning and the kids learning together wherever we can. And so here we all are, adults learning from what's happening in Barichara, and from each other, of course. And so, yeah, oh, do you already know Brian and Susan? Claire, do you know them?
No, but I just heard what they were saying in that recording. I wasn't able to be there, and they were like outstanding. I'm so happy that they're here.
I would describe them as my stereotype of a good Canadian. So I'll see how you feel about this, which is, to me, good Canadians, you know, good in a stereotyped way, is they're sort of quiet, reserved, humble, like British, sort of British in that way. Not the French part. I think you know what I mean, right? No, I don't have a problem with French people. It's just a different stereotype. And they're sort of reserved and quiet, and they happen to live close to Minnesota. So I've noticed Minnesotans in the US, Minnesotans, and people from the Toronto area are really similar. And basically, Brian and Susan exemplify that sort of soft-spoken, quiet, reserved, don't speak too much out of turn. You really don't know how smart they are. And they're frickin' brilliant. And they're so nice and helpful. They're the kind of people that would like hold your dog's leash while you go inside to buy milk at the corner grocery store, but they don't know you. And so they see what I mean, my stereotype of the good Canadian. And to me, they're just like, they exemplify that. And they've been doing transformational cultural change work for 20 years. So what an asset to have them joining the group. And they weren't part of Earth Regenerators before. They were just following me on Twitter. So just another feel for how all the weaving works out in the world. We're at a point where it might be a good time to close. So just, are there any final questions or comments before we close today?
Yeah, I wanted to mention real quick, I think next Friday, I'd like to kick off the next learning journey, which would be a 4-week regenerative finance crypto journey. So we can host that on the Mighty Networks platform. And yeah, just excited to kind of do a little bit of a deeper dive and share that with the community. And it'll basically cover 4 parts. The first is wallets. The second is DeFi. The third is DAOs. And then the fourth would be marketplaces. So that's kind of the general outline, and probably would have a blend of kind of hands-on Q&A with special guest speakers. So yeah, just excited to kind of weave that into the event and to offer that up to the community as well as a commons. So if you're interested, yeah, it's open to everybody and it'll be donation based.
Thank you, Antonio. Gail?
I also have an announcement for those who are interested. Tomorrow night, the Right Livelihood group is sponsoring a mini teach-in on animation, because it came up in some of the Right Livelihood discussions we had. For example, Alpha would like to do an animation on water. So it's going to be a lot of fun, actually. Both me and Bunny White have worked in that field in the past, so we're going to facilitate for an hour and a half. That's at 8 o'clock Eastern time, and it is in the Right Livelihoods course, if you want to come.
Thank you, Gail. One thing I just want to name that's happening is when I declared a story into being by saying, I'm officially leaving the leadership of Earth Regenerators, all of you who have been around for a while sort of giggle like, he left in October. Because really, 4 months into Earth Regenerators, we started with the Community Regenerators cohort with about 40 people, which ended up with 35 people who became deeply engaged in creating decentralized leadership and pro-social processes. Some of you were there for that early part. And then that grew into a whole just range of activities and decentralized leadership that has grown for roughly 2 years now, almost 2 years. And that in October last year, I invited the ER Fund governance group, well, ER Fund initially, Earth Regenerators Fund, into being, cultivating its governance. And I explicitly said I will not be part of the governance group because I want you all to make the decisions without my influence. I have too much influence here. I shouldn't have that influence. And so from basically December until now, members of the community have been building patterns of governance where I'm explicitly not part of it, which is why it's sort of a joke to say I'm leaving leadership. But the reason I needed to do it is we needed a clear story because the story was confusing. And so just by declaring I'm making a transition to focus on Barichara, and there's a governance council that needs to form, was like, we sort of had everything in sketch form of the governance council, but it doesn't exist yet. But by sort of nudging that little bird off the nest, as you said, I think it'll fly. And what's happened since I posted that video a week and a half ago is it has flown. There have been so many changes catalyzing and becoming coherent, led by so many other people in ER, that is enabling all of this other work in Barichara to just fly with it. And so I just want to name that piece because it's so important that if this was just Barichara, it would be pretty cool. But we don't need pretty cool. Read the writing on the wall. The best scientific models of what to expect in the next 10 years is a pretty significant decline in human population. And so, you know, if the best models tell us what the next 10 to 20 years look like, it's going to get really, really difficult. And we need to get really, really good at organizing these bioregional collaborations and bypassing nation states. My experience of dealing with visas and then going to the Centropic Agroforestry Group or the Territorial Foundation Group, where I'm like in a dream of how amazing everyone co-creates, and then in a shit show of how stupid the bureaucracy is and nothing works. And I go back and forth, and it's like, all right, which one has a future? And which one has a future is so damn clear. The nation state is dead. We just don't know it yet. It's like clinging and like a vampire, like sucking out whatever it can get in its last death grasps, because the whole damn thing is so screwed. And the real secret of Web3 and crypto, the real secret of it has been the secret of the internet all along. We can self-organize without nation states. Remember Occupy Wall Street? Remember Arab Spring? All those things, they showed us the dream. They showed us some of the elements. Most of them fell flat on their face. Organizing these bioregional governance patterns, these landscape investment patterns, these multi-level fractal patterns of regeneration, the way that Jacob described how to transition your own mental model of livelihood. This is what we need to do. And that's why something like Occupy Wall Street couldn't do it. But that's how important that Web3 crypto space actually is. Because it's not Bitcoin, it's not Ethereum, it's not the regen token. Look behind that. It's smart people finding ways to govern and create economies together. That's what it is. And that's what we are living out a full-scale prototype of right now. And we got to keep it going. So, so with that said, thank you all for just being on the surfboard as we're riding this wave. And yeah, I don't know if I'll even say any more than that. Just thank you, everyone. Onward we go. I'll try and keep doing Barichara updates every day. If the visa process makes me go somewhere else, I'll just hang my head in shame until the next one. But know that I'm there pushing forward with an incredible amount of patience, right?
Yeah.
I can pull out my own little Buddha at the bank, at the Chamber of Commerce, on the bus. So anyway, thank you, everyone. Onward we go. Talk to you soon.
Great to see you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Toodles.
Thanks a lot.